Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our fireside chat, where we are going to discuss vendor audits and the importance of being prepared for a vendor audit. So my name is Linda Anderson, and I'm the SAM Marketing Manager for the SAM team at Version 1, and I'm joined today by Jason Pepper, who is the head of the SAM practice. Jason, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Wow, I've been working in software asset management now since 2006. Prior to that, I used to work for Oracle, but mainly nowadays my focus is on generic software asset management, the methodologies and the processes that underpin good software asset management, and generally helping customers to both understand the complexities of software asset management and how to get the best out of the software that they've invested in.
So you're quite busy, yeah.
Yeah, you could say that, especially with the recent pandemic.
Of course. And so vendor audits, something that strikes the fear into many people, vendor audit. What is it? What is a vendor audit, and what are we seeing in the market just now from an audit perspective?
So an audit is, that depends on the vendor that you're considering, but essentially an audit is a way for an enterprise software vendor to ensure that you as an organization are using the software within the boundaries of the contract that you signed up to. So some software vendors include a technical method for controlling the use of the software, and you would have seen that, with having to type in a key, for example, to use Microsoft Office when such things were required. Nowadays they tend to dial back via the cloud, but enterprise software doesn't always have a self-policing mechanism built into it, and certainly certain vendors will actually ensure that there is no policing mechanism built into the software, because if the software doesn't self-police, then the responsibility for ensuring that you are operating within the bounds of the contract fall to you, the consumer. Mm-hmm. And that in itself generates an opportunity to have a conversation with the customer and try to understand what it is that they're using and how they're using it, and whether or not they're operating within the boundaries of that contract. So the second part of your question was how has that changed in any way after the pandemic?
What kind of activity are we seeing in the market?
So we're certainly seeing an increase in activity. So the software vendors themselves obviously have suffered as a byproduct of that, of the pandemic, just like everybody else has. But obviously they still have a need to hit revenue targets and to deliver shareholder value. And unfortunately, some of the software vendors are using an audit tactic to try to generate additional revenue and to catch up with the revenue forecast that they'd had for 2020. So we are seeing an increase of those vendors who do audit. We're seeing an increase of them actually auditing.
So it's complicated managing software. If they don't have license keys, it sounds like it's a little bit of a free for all. Yeah. So in the context of audits, it sounds like it's something that you have to be well prepared for.
Absolutely, yes. Certainly, large enterprise vendor audits. So, we're talking about Oracle, IBM, Micro Focus. They do quite a lot of auditing. Did I say IBM? IBM do a fair bit of auditing. Microsoft used to, but nowadays with their kind of drive towards being essentially 100% online in the cloud, there's less need for them to do auditing per se. But certainly a lot of the legacy vendor software like Oracle and IBM will have, they are still being audited. The software and the management of that software is very complicated. Mm-hmm. Something that we wouldn't necessarily recommend that the customers try to do themselves. And the process of being audited can be a massive burden on your organization as from a resource perspective, because the nature of the way that the audits are run, the auditors try to generate urgency. And what that urgency does is it's positioned as something that you must comply with. And actually, the reality is you just need to comply with what the terms are in your contract. So, the first thing you need to be doing if you receive an audit letter is to look at the contract, see what the contract says, and say, okay, yes, I have to respond, but I only have to respond within 45 days. It doesn't matter if the auditor sends you a letter or an email and say you must respond within 7 days. You don't. You have to comply with what's in the contract.
Okay.
So, yeah, the audit preparation can reap many benefits. Not being prepared for an audit can cause a lot of consternation and necessary resource usage in your organization.
So what can happen if an organization is not prepared, and they get a request out of the blue? What are the first, second, third things that they should be doing?
Well, obviously, if you're receiving an audit notification, then the clock is ticking. So you really need to start very quickly to put together an audit response team. And that audit response team isn't necessarily going to be just one person from IT. You're going to need potentially assistance from procurement to potentially find the contract that should be stored somewhere. They're not always. From legal to help you understand the actual terms of the contract. Maybe from the business, whoever is the actual kind of key stakeholders for that software, to try to understand what it is that they're using that software for. Because if you're a person who's responsible for software asset management in your organization, it shouldn't be assumed that you know everything about the way that the business operates or the way that the software is being used by the user community. Your skill set lies elsewhere. So the number of resources, the sheer number of resources that can be required to create an audit response team actually is quite surprising for most customers. But the key thing to do initially is to designate an owner, someone who's responsible for and handling the relationship with the auditors. I mean, the auditors are just doing their job, right? They're not out to get you. They're as far as they're concerned, they're simply doing their job. It's similar to someone who works for the tax man is coming to check out the VAT. They're just doing a job, and so they're not the enemy. They're just someone to be treated with caution, because potentially it could be a commercially problematic outcome. But having a focal point for the relationship is absolutely key. It's also important that that person is responsible for all of the communication back to the auditor. They can a lot of audit tactics include diverting and conquering, so trying to speak to as many people as possible in the organization, uncovering pieces of useful information, which can then assist to kind of piece together the actual what the landscape looks like in terms of how the software is being used. And unfortunately, as they say in World War II movies, loose lips sink ships. And so we need to control the communication that goes back to the auditor to make sure that it's within the boundaries of the contract and nothing more.
So an auditor has come in to your organization. They're working with you to ensure that their software is being used legally. What happens if they find something, if they find an exposure or non-compliance? What happens at that point?
Well, obviously it does depend on a vendor by vendor basis. It also depends what the extent of that under licensing is. Most vendors reserve the right to ask you to correct the situation in a short space of time, generally 30, 45, 90 days, generally 30. And you will be asked to procure the licenses that you need to bring it up. Generally most vendors won't kind of take it legal. They'll just ask you to correct the situation. But the problem therein lies that obviously a lot of enterprise software licenses cost a lot of money, and it may well be that you could be looking at a bill of 7 figures. So they'll ask you to correct that situation because it's it's often in a situation where they're correcting under licensing. They won't give you the same level of discount. In some cases, they'll give you list price. So you wouldn't, had you known about that problem beforehand and corrected it before you were audited, you may well have achieved a bigger discount. The other thing that they may well do is they'll ask you for what certain vendors call back support, or essentially historical support and maintenance.
Okay.
So I think there's a ruling, maybe in the European Union, but there's a ruling that says that generally they won't go back more than 5 or 6 years. But when we calculate this, we use a 6-year kind of look back to try and work out exactly what those costs would be. And they can be punitive, right? So if for example, they can calculate that you should have bought licenses to the tune of 100,000 euros, and the support maintenance is 20% of that, then you'll be looking at 20,000 euros for 6 years. So not just a bill for today's licensing, but you'd have to pay the back support as well. So the outcomes obviously can be expensive.
Yeah.
Then obviously beyond that, beyond just the financial problems, certainly publicly traded organizations, they really will not want their reputation to be tarnished. It's a situation that is better not to be in. And so, with all these things, preemptive management of licensing is going to save you a lot of trouble and strife further down the line.
So on that on that note, what would be the kind of top 3 tips that you would give anybody to help, regardless of what kind of position they're in, whether they are preparing for the eventuality of an audit or they are currently in an audit situation now? What would your advice be?
Similar to the one that I started earlier on. So you need to have a team. So have an audit team ready to go, or create one very quickly. Get a single focal point of contact for managing the relationship with that vendor. Try at the same time as putting that team together and creating the relationship with the auditors to understand what your position is in parallel. So if you don't know how to do that yourself, engage a third party to do it, who can help you. An independent third party will be able to help you understand what your position is, because when you're forewarned, you are forearmed. And you're better off knowing the bad news now so that you can start to position things and negotiate early on. Because the reality is that, most vendors, they don't really want to have a confrontational relationship. They want to have a positive relationship where they're seen to be, a strategic partner that's helping you achieve whatever it is you need to achieve within your business. But they will use that method as a mechanism for generating income. So audit team with a key focal point through which all communication goes, and try to understand what your position is now, right? And in no way do you need to go out and buy a tool. Some people will say to you, you need to buy a SAM tool. You certainly don't need to buy one specifically for the purposes of defending an audit. Any investment like that should be done with a long foresight of exactly what it is you want to achieve with that tool, and the what the benefits and also the potential pitfalls are. So if you're in an audit situation now, if you've got an audit letter on your desk, first thing, start to gather the people that you need, create a focal point, and try to understand exactly what it is that's going to be audited. Find your contract. Your contract is the reference point upon which everything needs to hang. So, for example, when you found the contract, if you can find it, go and find the audit clause. Is the vendor even allowed to audit you? What are the timescales for that audit? What are your obligations to respond to that audit? What do you have to do in terms of allowing the vendor, right? Does it say in there that you have to provide reasonable access or reasonable support to the audit? The question there is, what's the definition of reasonable? My definition of reasonable may well be different to the auditor's definition of reasonable. And then we're, a difference of opinion. And these things can take time to resolve. So the key thing is not to operate on the timescales that the vendor is demanding. Is to operate on your own timescales as long as they're within the confines of the contract.
The devil is in the detail, as with many of
Absolutely, the
these
devil
things.
is always in the detail, and sometimes the detail will work for you rather
Yeah.
than the vendor.
Well, thank you. That was really interesting. And for those who are worried about vendor audit or are have been approached already, we have much more content on the version 1 website relating to vendor audit. Or you can contact us directly if you're worried about a vendor audit and take advantage of a complimentary license consultation session at the URL on the slide. And as always, thank you very much, Jason, and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Linda. Great to talk to you.